Welcome back. A lot of folks have a position on whether assault weapons should be banned. Few of us know more about those weapons than those who are actually in combat or veterans, which is why an opinion piece in the Herald Tribune written by the Sarasota-based Florida Veterans for Common Sense caught our attention. We are combat veterans who served in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. We have experience with these types of weapons. We know the consequences of using them, they write. The reality is that good people and innocent children have been needlessly slaughtered by unbalanced individuals armed with military-style weapons. And another reality is the majority of Americans want these weapons banned, but those in Congress and state legislatures who have the ability to ban them are not listening, they write. Joining us tonight are two members of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense, Dave Siegwald and Jeff Morris, State Senator Greg Stubbe, who is an Iraq War veteran, and the gun lawyer in Sarasota, Jeff Young. I welcome you all, and I know this is a difficult issue. And Dave, let me start with you, because we just had another mass shooting at a high school, this time in Texas. And what stands out here is that an assault weapon was not used. It was the kid's dad's shotgun and a handgun. And a lot of people, I would imagine, would be saying, you know, it doesn't take an assault weapon to do this kind of damage.
Well, certainly you can do damage with any kind of weapon, Alan. There's no doubt about that. The only thing I would answer is, as an example, if the man in Las Vegas up in the tower up there was using a handgun or a hunting rifle, you wouldn't have 57 people dead, you might have 8 or 10 people dead. So there's no doubt you can do damage with any kind of weapon. But the fact is, with an assault weapon, which is a military weapon, which was designed for one thing, and that's to kill people. And it's as simple as that.
Jeff, and you spoke in the first hand in terms of what your experience was in Vietnam, in terms of seeing the impact of these weapons on the human body. You know, you're sitting next to a state senator who also saw combat in Iraq and also saw in many situations the same thing that you did, but you have two different views in terms of whether or not these weapons should be available to the public.
Well, may I just say it this way, we can agree to disagree. My experience as a medic in Vietnam was a first-person experience on a daily basis where I saw time after time after time, many times a day, where bodies were mutilated by what was then the AR-15, what was called an AK-47 or an M16. That was the military version of the AR-15. And the results are catastrophic. If it enters the body with a little pinpoint and goes out the size of an orange, and it eviscerates the human body. And these discussions we have, which I think of them as academic discussions, which normally go nowhere, but I would venture to say that if a person who I was speaking with had the unfortunate experience of having their child or their husband or their wife being a victim of this, I don't think there'd be this discussion.
You know, Senator, you were there in Iraq. You saw this kind of damage to the human body. You are in the state legislature. You aspire to be in Congress, and you're listening to what your fellow veterans are saying, and your response is?
Well, my first is more of a question in how do they as an organization define an assault weapon, because what has just been talked about and what I used what I was issued when I deployed was a weapon that was fully automatic, had a 3-round selector switch, 3-round burst. What was used in Vietnam was fully automatic weapons, and those aren't available to the general public in the United States. So I guess the first premise is, are we defining assault weapons as anything that carries a magazine? In the legislature this past year, when we had this debate about Parkland, one of the amendments that was put on was deemed an assault weapon ban. So there was an amendment put on the floor. It actually got put on by an oral vote, and then we did a roll call vote, and it got repealed. But the way it was defined in that amendment was basically any firearm that would take any level of magazine 5 rounds or more. So basically any type of weapon. So I guess that's the first question, is what's used in combat and what's available to the general public in the United States are very different in the way that they fire.
You know, Jeff, I was going to ask you a question, but we're up against a break, so we'll start with you in the next segment. We are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on vets and assault weapons right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. A Sarasota-based veterans group calls for banning assault weapons, and joining us for more are State Senator Greg Steube, the gun lawyer Jeff Young, and two members of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense, Dave Sigwald and Jeff Morris. And Jeff, let me start with you, because I'm going to read you a portion of the op-ed piece that these folks put into the Herald Tribune. We understand that some argue that banning assault weapons is not constitutional because of the Second Amendment. That is a hollow argument that has already been settled by the federal courts. Weapons can be regulated. We are certainly not advocating taking away handguns, shotguns, or rifles. The simple fact is the military and the police have a need for assault weapons. The public does not. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is, last time I read this Second Amendment, it doesn't mention the word need. It's not a bill of needs, it's a bill of rights. I do acknowledge that Supreme Courts in the past have said you can regulate assault weapons and ban them. I disagree with that. Just because they ruled that way doesn't mean I have to follow it. But it's not a matter of need. I don't have to demonstrate a need to exercise a right. People can argue that we don't need pornography on the internet, but yet it's still protected by the First Amendment, or we don't need to protect us from surveillance by law enforcement with bugs, but we still have the Fourth Amendment that says you can do that. So when people make this, you see this argument on Facebook and stuff all the time where they say, well, nobody needs an AR-15 because you can't hunt with it or you can't protect with it. First off, I disagree with that. You can do all those things, but last time I checked, it's not a bill of needs, it's a bill of rights. You don't have to demonstrate need in order to exercise a right, so I think that's a hollow argument.
Gentlemen, your response.
Well, I guess I would say, you know, if I feel like I want a hand grenade or a flamethrower, why not get one of those, you know? There's no, maybe I don't, maybe I want that. And I think that the government has to regulate the use of weapons that can cause great damage to our society.
You know, Senator, after a long period, the state finally this past session passed its first gun control regulation in many years. It raised the minimum age that a person could buy a long gun, and it did some other things. I know you voted against it, but you know, even conservative members of the Florida legislature and the conservative governor signed it into law.
Yeah, there were several pieces in there that I disagreed with. I disagreed with raising the age. I think that if we as a society are going to say you're an adult and you're 18 years old and you're old enough to be mature enough to raise your right hand and swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and serve our country in the military, you should have the ability to purchase a firearm. And what we've created is a scenario where, let's say you have a daughter who just graduated high school, she goes to the University of Florida, she lives by herself, she's 19 years old and she lives by herself in an apartment. She's an adult, she's old enough to sign a contract to buy a house, but she's not old enough to go down to the street to a firearms dealer and purchase a shotgun to keep in her home to protect herself.
But let me get your reaction to another line that was in this op-ed piece, if we have it on the screen. Other morally sound free nations have eliminated these types of weapons from civilian life, and the mass killings have stopped. We can do the same if we choose.
I don't agree that banning assault rifles or assault weapons, however they're defining it, because we haven't got the answer on that yet, will stop any of the mass shootings. The mass shooting that just occurred in Texas, he used a .38 revolver and a shotgun. And I can show you pictures of shotguns now that they make that look a lot like an AK because it takes a magazine. So in their letter that I read, it says they don't want to limit handguns, they don't want to limit shotguns, but there's shotguns now that you have that can take a magazine. They don't want to limit rifles, is what their op-ed said, yet there's rifles, hunting rifles, that can take a 20-round magazine.
So Jeff, let me ask you about, you know, Greg's point here is that how you define assault weapon is something that is open to interpretation. So therefore, how do you even go about the process of doing so?
May I say, I am not an expert on guns. I have a number of friends I polled who are gun owners who own AR-15s. They consider an AR-15 an assault weapon. One of my friends who is a deputy sheriff has an AR-15. He said you don't even need to buy anything to modify that into making it an automatic. One simply has to put their finger inside the trigger guard and pull it back and forth very quickly, and it functions as an automatic weapon. I don't know where there's a discussion, I didn't know there was one, that an AR-15 wasn't an assault weapon. It's in the vernacular, we talk about it, it's been open for discussion. I'm not here to split hairs. It's a war weapon. It's an M16 that's used in civilian life.
It's those weapons that you used and people used in war and combat is not the same weapons available to the general public. The weapons you use in combat are fully automatic, 3-round bursts. Those are not available to the general public in the United States. You can fire an AR-15 style weapon just as quick as I can fire my semi-automatic handgun. As quick as you pull the trigger is as quick as a round comes out.
But those weapons do come with the option of having very large capacity magazines.
You could put a large round capacity magazine in a handgun.
Well, people are talking about dealing with the large capacity magazines itself. The one thing that we do see when the public is polled on assault weapons or assault style weapons is that the public, whether it's here in Florida or around the country, seems to want to ban them by a large margin, Jeff.
Well, I would disagree with that. I mean, polls can show whatever you want them to show. We learned that in the last
But it's pretty
election.
consistent.
No, I just disagree with you. I don't think that that's true. The people that I speak to in my community will tell you that that is not correct, that they do not want to ban firearms. But the other good thing is that the Constitution doesn't care what the massive opinion is, because it's there to protect the minority. So if most of the people in the country want to outlaw something, that doesn't mean that they get to outlaw it. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And I would agree with what Greg has repeatedly said. Assault weapon, there's no such term as an assault weapon. It's made up. An assault is an action. As a criminal defense attorney, I can tell you when you read the intent statutes, assault is an action, it's not an item. You can't have an assault weapon, it's a made-up term, just like military style is made up or common sense gun control is made up. They use these big, broad, amalgamous, blobbish terms that they can stick in there whatever they want and take it from what they would consider today to be an M16 style weapon and branch it out into standard hunting rifles, shotguns, large capacity magazines. The issue is not assault rifles, the issue is the Constitution and firearm rights in general.
May I respond to this?
Sure.
Simply stated, Broward County has 2 level 1 trauma centers and 1 level 2 trauma center. If you recall, if being well versed in the news, just reading the newspaper, the doctors were coming out of there apoplectic, talking about the damage these bullets were doing to the human body. They never have that, you don't have that discussion on the 22, a 38, or a 45. The children who were hit by these AR-15s, their organs were eviscerated. There's no discussion about that. I don't want to, whatever one chooses to call it, it's a weapon of mass destruction, and it is a weapon that was used in the military, and it's been, whatever one wishes to call it, it's now being used in the civilian society, but it's a war weapon.
But the issue you're talking about is the bullet that comes out of the gun that causes the damage. You can put that bullet in a single action bolt action rifle and cause the exact same damage that you can out of an AR-15. So your issue isn't with the AR-15, your issue is with the caliber.
Yeah, you
If the caliber, then you want to ban the calibers, not just the firearm. So now you're expanding what you're talking about wanting to ban.
You can put that bullet in another weapon and shoot it single shot.
Correct.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to kill 50 people with a single shot.
I don't know, the guy went up to the tower in Texas and killed just as many people, if not more, than they did in Parkland from sniping from a tower.
Well, that's true.
That was a single
That's
action
true.
bolt action rifle.
That's
so
true.
That's not true.
In 1964, you're going back to 1963 or 64, that guy was well versed in ammunition. He was in a tower where he was completely locked away, and they couldn't get to him.
Or a military assault
Nobody
rifle.
had, he had 5 hours. He had 5 hours up there.
We only have a couple seconds here, but Mike, this debate is not dissimilar to the debates that we've had on this show about this issue before. What does your group hope to accomplish by writing this op-ed piece and getting your position out there?
Well, what we hope to accomplish is to talk to people and get them to convince their politicians of our point of view that this country does not need this type of weapon, and to elect those people to office. And then after that, make laws to ultimately ban assault weapons, however you want to define an assault weapon. That's what the ultimate goal is, to raise an awareness. We are now, we watch these kids and they're leading the adults. I think it's time for the adults to act like adults.
Okay, we have to take a quick break and we'll be back for our final thoughts in a moment. Stay with us. Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Greg, I'm going to start with you because in the commercial break, we got a really good viewer question that I want to put it to you. There's been a lot of talk, especially after the Texas shooting, that this young man apparently got that shotgun and the other weapon from his father's cabinet. It was unsecured. Obviously, there was a failure of responsibility here. Do you think a parent in that circumstance should face criminal charges for not securing their weapons.
In the state of Florida, we have a law, and I actually brought it with me so I can give you the site after we talk today, that makes that it's a second-degree misdemeanor. If you negligently allow a minor to obtain a firearm in your possession and they use it in the commission of a crime, it is a crime in the state of Florida. I would be surprised if it's not a crime in the state of Texas. But in my opinion, banning any type of weapon is not going to stop any of these tragedies. We raised the limit to 21 to purchase a firearm. The shooter in Texas was 17. He didn't even use an AR-style weapon in the commission of his crime. You're not going to prevent evil by restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens the ability to defend themselves.
Jeff?
The status quo isn't working. Australia banned assault weapons, and they had a buyback program. And there has not been an example, a situation in Australia where there's been a mass shooting since they bought back the assault weapons.
So Jeff, I mean, obviously, you know, the status quo isn't working. We seem to be having these mass shootings at an increasing pace, and we have the same discussions afterwards all the time, and then we're right back where we started.
Sure, but yet gun ownership has actually decreased in the past. There are just as many guns now as there were 50 years ago, but we're seeing more mass shootings. So to tie one to the other is ludicrous. It makes absolutely no sense. There's obviously something else going on in our society. And as far as a summation goes, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, military style versus civilians don't need these firearms. Well, when the founders wrote the Constitution in 1776, the civilians were the military. They had the exact same type of firearms that the military did. So to make the argument that we should have different firearms than what our government has goes completely against the concept of the Second Amendment, which was to allow citizens to have firearms to protect themselves from a tyrannical government. So taking our firearms away doesn't fix anything.
And Dave, you get the last word.
Well, I still say that's a hollow argument. I'll stay with that. But I think our house is burning down, and I don't think we're going to stop it by pouring more gasoline on it, Alan. If we could stop a few deaths by banning assault weapons, I'd say it would be worth it.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much.